Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. Welcome to this Shabbat situated on the weekend in which we commune once again with the memory and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, whose inspiration we need now more than ever. We're going to be hearing tonight, as a part of our worship service, words that Dr. King spoke a couple generations ago. These words are words that we repeat. Some of them will be familiar to you, others will feel new. But the words are as poignant and pointed in this moment as they've ever been. Maybe perhaps even more so than they've ever been. We gather on this Shabbat celebrating the legacy of Dr. King at a time in which the issue of structural racism in our country has risen to the fore yet again, against the backdrop of a violent insurrection in Washington and a chaotic transition of our national government unlike anything we've ever seen or imagined before. I suspect that you will hear these words with new ears, as I am experiencing them with new ears, with new hearts, with new souls. Let us open ourselves to what Dr. King would say, did say, does say for this day and for all the days to come. The words I want to share with you for beginning our service together come from Dr. King's famous I Have a Dream speech on the March on Washington on August 28th, 1963. Here are words that some of which will be familiar to you, but I want you to open your ears to hear them anew. I promise you, you will hear new responsibility in them. Here are Dr. King's words. So we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a check that every American was able to cash. This check was a promise to all men, yes, Black men, as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this check when it comes to her citizens of color. Instead of honoring this promise, America has given the Negro people a bad check. The check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is broke. We refuse to believe that there are no funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we have come to cash this check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and justice. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand in the warm doorway which leads into the palace of justice. In seeking our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to be changed by physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to great heights, meeting physical force with soul force. Yes, we must not allow our creative protest to be changed by physical violence. And we must rise to great heights to meet physical force with soul force. This Shabbat is about restoring and energizing, powering our soul force. Join with us in making Shabbat filled with joy, filled with song, filled with beauty, filled with love, and a deep connection of community. All of this is in service of our creating in ourselves anew at a time where soul force is flagging, creating soul force stronger than ever. We will need it for the days ahead. I invite you to join in singing with us from the book of Psalms, Psalm 29 on page 18 of the online prayer book. You can start in the second line of the Hebrew in singing with us.
Hey, hey, oh, hey. Hey, hey, oh. Hey, hey, oh, hey. Hey, oh, hey, oh. There is strength and power all around and within me. Bring it out, bring it peace. There is strength and power all around and within me. Bring it out.
There's so much joy tonight in our service. Please join me in this really very joyful melody of the Chadodi on pages 20 and 21 in your online prayer book. Let's hear you. Second verse, Likrat Shabbat, Lechu Benecha, Ki Mekor Habracha, Nerosh Mikedem, Nesucha, Sof Ma'aseh. rise and we face the door that we entered in, and we welcome in the Shabbat night in all of her glory, in all of her beauty. It's the last verse. Boi Shalom, Atet Malam, Kam Besimcha Uzola, Toch Emunei, Am Segula, Boi Chama, Boi We stay standing. We just take a breath to center ourselves, and we continue with the Baruch Hu on page 28.
Words from the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. One of the greatest problems of history is that the concepts of love and power are usually contrasted as polar opposites. Love is identified with a resignation of power, and power with a denial of love. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. We join together in our Jewish expression of love, interwoven with power, our words of unity, of oneness, Shema, on page 34.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. Shar Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Please be seated and join with me in the Ve'ahavta on page 36. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha be'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha veshinantam levanecha dibarta bam veshivtecha bevetecha uvlechtecha vaderech uvshochbecha uvekumecha ukshartam leot ayadecha vehayu letotafot beinenecha uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru vasitem et kol mitzvotai vitem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem.
As we prepare for the Mi Chamocha, our song of freedom, our song reminding us that we are to be ever engaged citizens in the world and not tolerate or be passive to the injustices around us, we look to the words of Dr. King from 1958, Strive Toward Freedom. In every movement toward freedom, some of the oppressed prefer to remain oppressed. Almost 2,800 years ago, Moses set out to lead the children of Israel from the slavery of Egypt to the freedom of the Promised Land. Moses soon discovered that slaves do not always welcome their deliverers. They become accustomed to being slaves. They would rather bear those ills they have, as Shakespeare pointed out, than flee to others that they know not of. They prefer the flesh pots of Egypt to the ordeals of emancipation. But this is not the way out. To accept passively an unjust system is to cooperate with that very system. Thereby, the oppressed become as evil as the oppressor. Non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. Let us join our voices together with these words of Martin Luther King, Mi Chamocha, page 40. This is the silence to reflect before we prepare for our song of freedom, our song of liberation, to absorb the words of King and to ask ourselves, how are we showing up in this moment? Are we being passive or are we being active?
Tehilo, Ose, Fele, Nora, Tehilo, Ose, Fele, Iha, Oha, Baeli Madonna. In the darkness of this night, the darkness that exists in our soul, the darkness that exists in our nation, and all the darknesses that plague us, we are reminded that the only way we know darkness is because of the existence of light. And the way that we recognize light is because darkness is also present. So we are constantly migrating between the two, reminded that there are blessings to be found both in the dark and in the light, and that the transition between one and the other is itself something to be sanctified. And that's the reason why we sing this prayer that's on the supplemental page right after Micha Mocha. In the bottom right-hand corner, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom. Cause us in this darkness to lie down in peace, so that we can always be reminded, always remember that light is always on the way. Please join in singing with me. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom, L'Shalom. V'ha'amidenu Malkeinu L'chaim. Fos aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha, Ufos aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha. Shelter us beneath thy wings, O Adonai. Guard us from harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen.
Words from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Religion and race. How can the two be uttered together? To act in the spirit of religion is to unite what lies apart, to remember that humanity as a whole is God's beloved child. To act in the spirit of race is to sunder, to slash, to dismember the flesh of living humanity. Is this way to honor a father, to torture his child? How can we hear the word race and feel no reproach? Racism is worse than idolatry. Racism is Satanism, unmitigated evil. Few of us seem to realize how insidious, how radical, how universal and evil racism is. Few of us realize that racism is humanity's gravest threat to humanity, the maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason, the maximum of cruelty for a minimum of thinking. The Amidah, our standing prayer, begins with the words, Adonai sifatei tiftach, ufi agi tehilatecha. God, open up my lips, that my mouth, that my words may declare your praise. God, help us to make the words that we share in service of the sacred. Help us to make our words worthy of your name. Hold us accountable to words of hate, to words of smallness, and remind us that we cannot afford to tolerate such speech or such actions in our midst. We rise now for our conversation with God, the Amidah on page 46.
Adonai sabatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzhak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor ve'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chadim Tovim Vekonei Hakol Bezocher Hastei Avot Ve'imahot Umevi Gula Livnei V'neihem L'man Shemo Be'ah Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magin Abraham Vezra Sarah Atagi Bor Leolam Adonai Mechaye HaKol Atah Rav Lehoshia Mashiv HaRuach Umorid HaGashem Mechakel Chaim Bechesed Mechaye HaKol Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim Verofeh Cholim Hu matir asurim, hu mekayem emunato lishenei afar. Michamocha ba'gevurot, hu mito melach, melech mitu mechayeh, hu matzmiach Yeshua. V'neman atalachayot hakol Baruch Adonai Mechayeh hakol Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh U'kadoshim b'chol yom Yehalelucha selah Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. Please continue on your own through page 62, and when you are ready, you may be seated.
As we emerge out of this holy silence, we hear the words of King in the mid-60s speaking to each of us and our inner prophet. Are we listening to our inner prophet? King says, today we particularly need the Hebrew prophets because they taught us that to love God was to love justice. That each human being has an inescapable obligation to denounce evil where he sees it and to defy a ruler who commands him to break the covenant. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because decent people must be imbued with the courage to speak the truth, to realize that silence may temporarily preserve status or security, but that to live with a lie is a gross affront to God.
Walk in the spirit, I walk in the light. I walk through the darkest hours of night, and I call all my ancestors to my left and my right to walk with me, to walk with me.
Walk with me,
Oh baby,
walk with me, walk with me,
walk with me.
I walk in the spirit, I walk in the light. I walk through the darkest hours of night, and I call all my ancestors to my left and my right to walk with me, to walk with me, walk with me, walk with me. I walk in the spirit, I walk in the light. I walk with the promise of healing inside, and I call all my ancestors to my left and my right to walk with me, to walk with me, walk with me, walk with me.
I walk in the spirit, I walk in the light. I walk with my neighbors to fight the good fight.
And I call all my ancestors to my left and my right to walk with me, to walk with me, walk with me, walk with me. I walk in the spirit, I walk in the light. I walk with the knowledge that we'll be alright. And I call all my ancestors to my left and my right to walk with me, to walk with me, walk with me, walk with me, walk with me, walk with me. Oh baby, won't you walk with me?
Hallelujah. That was awesome. I miss the choir so much. It's so inspiring to hear their words and voices and the images of Leo Becker's singing and walking and doing towards justice. So what a perfect segue into inviting our speaker tonight, Yavilah McCoy. In the mystical texts of the Zohar, the intention of human existence is articulated through a metaphor of human beings being like the wick in an oil lamp, and that the mitzvot and the good deeds are the oil creating a radiant light that illuminates before the Creator. And if we are those wicks, and we are seeking to burn bright against the darkness of injustice, I know at this time, many of us feel pretty diminished. We are weary and exhausted. We are angry, we're furious, And we are feeling a little depleted in this moment. And at the same time, it seems like the forces of hatred and fear and greed and violence, they are not getting tired. And we must refuel in this moment, because if we do not, if our sacred oils run out and our radiance is diminished, that will diminish the humanity of all people. And that is our work in the world, is to be shining brightly and radiating out into the world. So it is that in mind tonight that I am just so excited to invite Yavilah McCoy as our speaker. She is someone who brings spiritual uplift and holy agitation to pour some extra sacred fuel into our soul force, as King once said. Yavilah McCoy is a renowned national speaker, educator, and spiritual practitioner who stands on the shoulders of 3 generations of her African-American Jewish ancestry. Yavilah is a pioneer of the Jewish diversity and equity movement and is an advocate and mentor for the empowerment of a transglobal community of Jews of color. We're blessed to have a moment of intimacy with Yavilah tonight as she speaks to us to refuel us so that we can shine ever brighter. Welcome to LBT, Yavilah.
Dr. King taught us, today our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. The large house which we live demands that we transform this worldwide neighborhood into a worldwide brotherhood and sisterhood and siblinghood. Together we must learn to live as brothers, or together we will be forced to perish as fools, Dr. King taught us. He taught us to passionately and indefatigably bridge the gulf between our scientific progress and our moral progress. And he taught us that one of the greatest problems of mankind is that we suffer from a poverty of spirit, which stands in glaring contrast to our technological abundance and advancements. He said that the richer we become materially, the poorer we have become morally and spiritually. When I think of Dr. King's legacy to my and my family's life as a Black Jewish woman, I think of what he taught us to love God as manifesting as the love of righteousness, the ability to reach in times of light and shadow for truth and morality and integrity. On Friday evenings, there is a traditional Jewish prayer called Kiddush. This prayer is said to sanctify and dedicate the observance of the Sabbath. It begins, Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, Yom Hashishi. And it was evening and it was morning, the 6th day. At the Women's March in 2019, I spoke about this phrase and evening and morning being a part of the same day because they described times we were living in that felt both precious and perilous. Times when many of us from day to day couldn't easily tell whether the circumstances we were facing would bring us to a new dawn or a dark night. What has been important over those times and in these times we live in right now is to figure out the meaning of light and shadow and what it means to dance in the light, knowing that even in the shadow is nothing but the absence of light. And that in shadow, how we behave matters just as much as when we are able to see the light clearly. In these times, you may be experiencing what I call the sacred dance of light and shadow. Times like now, at the arrival of Shabbat, where we hold questions regarding the advent of darkness in our times. You may be holding questions about our relationship to history. Questions about the ways that you and your families and your ancestors are to be implicated by our nation's growing love affair with white supremacy. You may be living in the shadow of new reevaluations and new realities that have come to our doorstep. Questions that have caused us to ask, how do we arrive at this moment? What is it meant for our communities to have grown up with access, privilege, and power? What is true and what needs to be reset in these times, in our bodies, in our families, in our priorities? What is at the center? How in these times of light and shadow are you deepening empathy, deepening your capacity for communication, deepening your ability to forgive even those who have not asked for your forgiveness? These are times as we dance through light and shadow, where we have to ask what is needed and what is not, and what no longer serves us. As we come through these times and actually that it is going to be attuned. There are different identities that we all hold that help us to understand. Where are you not just agreeing to be wake, but also agreeing to move from woke to work, so that what's true about you and what's true about us as a nation becomes lasting beyond this moment? What are the bright lines? The bright lines that we see in the dark that help us to know that racism has to power needs to pause, is just as important as learning about diversity and inclusion. That working to end systemic racism is the work that lies ahead of us. In 2021, we are looking at the need to be an interconnected community. We're looking at the need to engage in collective powering. We're looking at disparities and inequities as a call to action to make a more equitable future for us all. We are living in a society where we all need each other because we cannot get through this together without holding on to each other. We're looking at protests as moments of possibilities. We're looking at the weaponization of our democracy. We're looking at those who understand and do not understand that in order for us to move forward, our deepest power will be in our collective unity, not our selfishness, and not in causing each other to be commodities in a capitalist system. What has been our shared trauma might be on your mind. What is the path we will need to move toward collective healing? So as we hold all these questions in light and shadow, I'm here tonight to ask you to be in gratitude, to live into the dark with gratitude for breath in our lungs and strength in our bodies and hope in our spirits to rise up and face a new day. I'm asking you to be grateful for gracious leaders who help us to live in beloved community in morning and in evening. In these days and times, I'm asking you to be grateful about opportunity. Loved ones precious, but families across the globe who are with us and asking for generosity and compassion, who are grateful with us and not forgetting what we have lived through, and that survival demands of us continued memory, continued grieving, and continued hope. As we look forward, we're looking forward to the power of healing and transformation. We're looking to be able to find our way of our beginning and to fully address our national need for healing. We're looking for days when we can release ourselves from the perpetual loop of reenacting the sins of racism upon ourselves and each other. As you look out in your community, are you finding ways to not just get back to a new day, but to reset in these times and balance your humanity so that you can have the capacity to see and understand the legal and extra legal terrorism and repression that has long been disavowed by white America, but that we have seen in recent weeks runs like a highway from the past to the present, and that exists and has always existed, keeping unequal justice, keeping unequal economic opportunity, unequal housing, and unequal health care and education a reality between us? Will we take a moment to be our full selves in community? This Shabbat, I'm asking you to remember the wisdom of my teachers among the Zulu, among the Xhosa, among the Tswana, among the Venda, and other African ancestors that taught me Umumuntu, Ungumuntu, Ungabantu. I am because we are, and we are because I am. This evening, as we enter into MLK weekend, I'm asking you to remember with me the intersectionality and the interrelationality of our common humanity, and to work with me to live in harmony with all dimensions of our existence as Jewish people, as people around the world, as folks who are in relationship with land, animals, water, air, and fire, and must help us to remember the wisdom taught us, mitakuye oyasin. We are all relatives, and we are here on earth to take care of one another. How are we learning to live in right relationship with one another? How are we being present to one another and the earth in ways that promote flourishing and healing? As we look to a new administration, we must look to means we have for supporting just laws, just policies, just systems, just government, and leaders who will work with us to be workers, not saviors. How will we stand together against white nationalism and the influence it has secured under the last administration? The influence it has secured within political mainstream politics? How will we be directly impacted by the need to help stem the growth and resurgence of anti-Semitism, misogyny, and racism, and the ways in which our world we are undermining the tribal sovereignty of our indigenous siblings in this country? How will we help each other to gain respite from extrajudicial killings of Black people, to address gun violence, to enact common sense gun laws? We need each other's help to replace failed structures and policies with deeper investment in Black communities. Our communities are impacted by all of our need for immigrant justice. We are impacted by the ways in which vulnerable communities have suffered with the reversal through legislation of services to our elderly, to our LGBTQ, to our refugees, to our social service networks. As a Jewish woman of color, I am organizing to make sure that in all of our bodies, we continue to see all of our futures on the line. We need to work together to champion our right to bring this administration and all those who we have placed in office into a truly new day, where we are working together across lines of division to be able to make a better country for us all. On this evening of MLK weekend, I ask you to remember Assata Shakur. She taught me it is our duty to fight for our freedom, to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. May the meditations of our hearts this evening move us from passive listening to active listening to the cries of real people facing real issues and real needs for change. May the opening of our hearts help us to better hear the cries of our babies and the groans of our elders. May our prayer this evening help us to break the chains of the incarcerated, the disenfranchised, the refugee, the immigrant, and the stranger among us. And may this evening and this gathering help us to listen differently for our own heartbeats, and to listen for the patter of fear that might still us and keep us from drumming up the courage that Dr. King taught us we will need to get free. Shabbat Shalom. I wish you a desired destination of wellness, liberation, and peace. May you be well.
Amen. Wow. Thank you, Yavilah, for those incredibly important words, moving from woke to work. And a reminder for us to be thinking about our collective unity, and really what each of us needs to do in order to reach that collective sense of healing. And we're now at that point in our service where we are thinking about the suffering that is happening around our world. We have reached now 2 million deaths as a result of coronavirus. We know that a disproportionate number of those deaths are of people of color. And we think about the illness, we think about the loneliness, we think about the incredible loss that has taken place over these last several months. And we pause in our service to simply name and to simply hold all of those who are struggling, both around the world and around our country, and also those in our own community, the people that we love who are in need of a prayer of healing, and the people who don't have family or friends to offer this prayer for them. And so at this time, I want to invite you to say out loud the name of someone whom you are thinking about on this Shabbat who is in need of our Mishaberach prayer, our prayer for healing. And we join together towards that collective healing that Yavilah taught us about with words of Mishaberach, words of healing, in the middle of page 253.
We continue with the Aleinu on the bottom of page 282. If you are able, please rise. Aleinu l'shareach l'adon hakol, l'ateit kedula le'otzer b'reshit, shelo sanu kegoyei haratzot, ve'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkenu kahem, ve'gor aleinu ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי החיים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר אדוני למלך כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד.
Some words to help us prepare for the recitation of Kaddish, words found in the prayer book on page 289. The light of life is a finite flame. Like the Shabbat candles, life is kindled, it burns, it glows, it is radiant with warmth and beauty. But soon it fades, its substance is consumed, and it is no more. In light we see, in light we are seen. The flames dance and our lives are full. But as night follows day, the candle of our life burns down and gutters. There is an end to the flames. We see no more and are no more seen. And yet we do not despair, for we are more than a memory slowly fading into the darkness. With our lives, we give life. Something of us can never die. We move in the eternal cycle of darkness and death, of light and life. As we prepare to recite the Kaddish prayer this evening, we remember especially Barry Rubens, husband of Babs Rubens, Alvin Talbot, father of Jonathan Talbot, father-in-law of Lisa Talbot, grandfather of Stephen and Jennifer, and Shirley Hike, mother of Laurel Rubel, mother-in-law of Jeff Rubel, grandmother of Allison, Zoe, and Benjamin, whom death has taken from us in recent days. And we link their names with Tony Begovich, B. Bresla, Carolyn Bronstein, Mark Edelstein, Lajos Feldman, Alan Freeling, Jean Gach, Robert Garber, Richard Giesberg, Ruth Glucksman, Irving Goldberg, Richard A. Goodman, Joseph Gottlieb, Martin Grainer, Joyce Halper, Rabbi Woolley Kelter, Marilyn Karsten, Edward Kaufman, Samuel Cohn, Marion Koplov, Nathan Levy, Milton Lewis, Molly Luftman, Babette Frank Maccabee, Sylvia Machtinger, Irving Martin, Sylvia Martin, Tammy Perkin, George Regas, Esther Geller Sherman, Betty Siegel, June D. Simon, Erwin Sklar. If there are others we should include on this Shabbat, please speak their names aloud. We think as well, of course, of all of those who we name in our hearts, also the innocent victims, so many, of COVID-19, of violence here in our nation, all over the world. We must recommit, especially on this Shabbat of celebrating and rededicating to our responsibility to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. We must commit ourselves to being Osei Shalom, makers of peace. Please join with me as we give thanks for the blessing of life, all of their lives, and those we carry with us, as we join together in the Mourner's Kaddish, page 294. If you're able, I invite you to stand at this time. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, yibarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shemei dekutsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, imru, Amen. Osei shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, imru, Amen. May the giver of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved among us, and let us together say, Amen. Osei shalom imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, Amen. Ya'aseh shalom Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. On this Shabbat, we are going to conclude our time together with the way in which we concluded our time with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on this earth. These familiar words were the words that he spoke, ironically, perhaps even prophetically, on the night before his death. These were the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 3rd, 1968. They were his charge to us then and now. He said, we've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Friends, fellow congregants, members of this community, Americans, I want to tell you, I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. May this be a Shabbat in which we reach for healing of soul, the restoration of our soul force, so that when we head out into the new week, we can take each other by the hand and resume our journey to the promised land. Shabbat Shalom.